внимательно ознакомились с вашими предложениями по урегулированию острого кризиса на Украине. В целом, наше взаимодействие на международной арене, безусловно, способствует укреплению основополагающих принципов мироустройства и многополярности.
Andrew, what do you think is the proposal that the Chinese premier carries with him to Moscow?
Well, you've got to look at the China's 12-point plan. The top point in the 12-point plan is that the need to respect other countries' territorial integrity. Well, that's the kind of message for Russia. But on the other hand, it also highlights the fact that in any kind of peace deal, it's not just a one-sided story. You've got to respect the security concerns of the other side. In other words, otherwise it will be just one side imposing its will on the other, and the territorial or the security concern of Russia should also be taken into account. And also the 12-point plan highlights the need for humanitarian kind of consideration, because there is a humanitarian crisis happening. So many people killed, injured, and the whole country in disarray and in rubble.
So this, in the given situation, Peter, in the given situation, as we saw the pictures, it appeared to me quite clear that unfortunately for America, America has lost the war, because Putin and Xi have the edge. The business is fine. They've not degrown. They have leverage over the West. The attempt to bomb the Nord Stream by the Americans has failed, in fact been exposed by our own journalists. And it is really indirectly, if you saw the American response, Antony Blinken's response, he seems to be really looking forward to the prospect of an announcement from Moscow. We really welcome any peace effort that comes in. I mean, this is the kind of language that comes from an America that seems to have capitulated in this matter.
The United States
I don't think that.
still
No, my question is to Peter, please. Yeah.
The United States still seems to be intent on winning this war militarily. As dangerous as that is, and as unlikely as that is still the message coming out. The interesting thing is that even Zelensky seems to be hedging his bets right now. He has not completely rejected the Chinese peace plan. And if you look at the amount of ammunition and equipment that Ukraine is asking for and what the West is able to provide, there is a big gap. So there are more reports coming out that Ukraine's prospects to win militarily are shrinking. And so that's putting pressure on Zelensky. There's also an international effort right now to bring Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table. Some of it's being led by Lula in Brazil. And Lula said that China and India should lead that effort to get the two sides together. So the United States is not in a strong position, but there are many in the United States who are willing to fight to the last Ukrainian in order to defeat China and Russia in this.
But I'm just practically looking at the situation. It appears to me that even more than Putin, it's Xi Jinping who has the cards. It is China which is trying to emerge as the peace broker. And the China negotiated outcome could heavily favor Russia. You scarcely expect a China negotiated outcome to favor America. If China is holding the cards, do you trust China, Peter? China is going to help Putin, not Biden.
Well, China is calling for a ceasefire. And the point that American leaders keep making is that a ceasefire right now actually supports Russia much more than Ukraine.
But Americans don't have a choice.
Russia controls much of the Donbass.
But America doesn't have a choice. Yeah. You know, Zelensky's become so corrupt.
Ukrainians are willing to keep fighting.
And the Ukrainian government has become so corrupt and so fed by so much money and infighting, and their financial needs are just skyrocketing.
Ukraine has always been corrupt.
But more
That's
corrupt now
nothing
than
new.
ever before.
Well, there's more money available now than ever before.
That's the point. Tatiana, how do you look at it from Moscow? Is this a step towards the ending of the war or something else?
Good evening, Arnab. Well, look, I don't think that our American friends are ready to handing the towel just yet, you know.
Okay.
Despite my best hopes for this outcome, and I've told you, I think I told you a year ago, and I will tell you now that, you know, unfortunately, until there's an end to the endless military supplies that the US continues to make money on, there's not going to be any negotiation about anything. But you remember the last time that President Putin offered a ceasefire, an end to hostilities, to allow the Orthodox Christians to celebrate Christmas. And what did the Ukrainian side do? They continued firing. Any negotiation, any type of compromise can only come from two sides. If there's only one side invested in this, it's never going to happen.
In the present situation, if you look at the situation internationally, Peter, I think America's sort of, you know, I would say shot itself in the foot. China just negotiated a peace deal between Riyadh and Tehran. America lost out. Biden went all over to try and make up with Saudi Arabia. It did not help. Now you have Saudi Arabia, Iran, Moscow, Beijing, all becoming one bloc, and large other influential nations, powers, great powers like India, defending our own national interest. So I don't know what is the West really achieved. I mean, if you look at the sum total, Peter, I know you've been a cynic, but is America living under some kind of illusion on this?
Biden came to office saying he was going to reestablish American hegemony. The United States will be back #1.
Who?
Well, that hasn't happened. And you know, it's important to realize that most of the world is not going along with U.S. sanctions.
It's not.
2/3 to 3/4 of the world population are not supporting U.S. sanctions.
Yes.
Only 33 countries are. And so the United States, while it's not weak and isolated, the United States is not able to assert itself in a multipolar world the way it was for 3 decades when the U.S. was the unipolar power. Russia can challenge the United States to some extent militarily, and China is challenging the United States economically and now diplomatically. I mean, the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia was in many ways a game changer. China is going to play a new role in the world now. And Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow on the heels of the Iran-Saudi deal is a very important global diplomatic development. If Xi can negotiate a peace deal between you, and he's going to talk to Zelensky next, then Xi will be up for the Nobel Peace Prize, you know, and he'll deserve it if he can broker a peace here. That's what the world wants. Most of the world does not want to see more fighting.
So then, in a way,
there is nothing to be gained.
So in a way, therefore, Andrew and Tatiana, it's exactly worked the other way around. I mean, if things move in this direction, then the whole idea of pushing NATO, encouraging Ukraine, this has been the tipping point when the West loses a lot of power globally and influence. It's moving in that direction. I think, Andrew, what do you think? I'm sure you agree with me. I'm sure you do.
Well, there's no doubt that the world is now changing quite quickly from a unipolar world order, as it were, dictated entirely by the United States, to one which is more multipolar. According to the OECD's research, the developing world, particularly, of course, including India and China and countries in Latin America and Africa, are going to account for 60% of the world economy by the world 2035 using purchasing power parity measurements. And according to Goldman Sachs' latest research, by the year 2027,
so this whole
the top 8 countries in the world will all be developing countries now, except the United States by then, which will descend from world number 1 to world number 3 after China and
then
India.
Southeast
so the
Asia
whole world is changing quite rapidly.
Yeah, Southeast Asia is out of American grip. You got Iran, Saudi Arabia, India, China, Russia, all independent in our foreign policy. So things are moving very differently right now. Well, we're going to keep a very close watch, ladies and gentlemen, on those talks that have been happening. And I personally think it's going to have the ripple effect. And I know, people won't like it, but Putin still has the edge on this one.
President Xi very publicly suggested in the physical presence of President Putin that there be a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Now, I can't imagine Xi, who's the ultimate diplomat, would have made such an offering without President Putin, in President Putin's face, without President Putin knowing it was going to happen. Within a couple of minutes of this came the American response. Hang on to your seat, Colonel. Here's Admiral Kirby.
We'd be concerned if coming out of this meeting, there was some sort of call for a ceasefire. Because right now, while a ceasefire sounds good, it actually ratifies Russia's gains on the ground. It actually serves Russia's purpose for a ceasefire to basically call a stop right now without any acknowledgement that Russia's illegally inside Ukraine.
So United States will be against the ceasefire because of this principal issue or because it was proposed by China?
I think I've been very clear. It's about the principle of a ceasefire called for right now, which would essentially just ratify Russia's gains.
Never mind all the bloodshed it would stop, Admiral Kirby. Never mind all the bleeding of cash and military equipment it would stop, Admiral Kirby. God forbid President Putin should smile over it. What did you think, Colonel?
When a great power like China offers anything resembling a peace plan that involves a ceasefire, our response should be, we're taking it on board and we're going to examine it, and we will respond after we've had a chance to examine it thoroughly. That's what a good diplomat would say. We have taken a position that the only arbiter in this operation is us. In other words, we're the only ones that can accept or reject any peace plan or ceasefire for Ukraine, which is utterly nonsensical. But this is what we've taken as a position from the very beginning, Judge. If we were interested in peace, and I think we've made it very clear that we're not, if we were, then we should have simply said, we'll examine the proposal, we'll study it, and we'll respond. That costs you nothing to say that, and that's the diplomatic language that we should have used. The second part is that China is genuinely interested in bringing this war to a close. We need to get that through our heads. Everything that China is about is economic expansion, building prosperity. They want to build the One Belt, One Road that runs from the coast of China in the east on the Pacific all the way to Europe. To do that, you've got to cross through Central Asia, and from Central Asia through Russia to Ukraine, and through White Russia to Europe. They want that trade. The Europeans, by the way, would like to trade with China. Now, why do they want to go through Central Asia overland? Because right now they're heavily dependent for oil, gas, all the natural resources, minerals, food, on transport over the sea. Everything has to come out of East Africa, out of the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Iran via ship through the Strait of Malacca up through the South China Sea to China's ports. That means that they are vulnerable for thousands of miles to what? It's called the United States Navy. And they don't want to be vulnerable to that anymore. They would like to avoid it. China is not a natural maritime power. I don't care how many ships they build. They know that.